On February 11th, a Bombardier CRJ-700 regional jet landed at Sheridan County Airport in Wyoming with all three primary cockpit display screens completely non-functional. The crew had been flying in solid cloud cover with zero external visual reference for 22 minutes. Their only functioning instrument was a standby altimeter. No airspeed, no navigation, no engine readouts, no artificial horizon. The NTSB would later describe the recovery as statistically improbable. This is a technical reconstruction of how it happened. United Express Flight 441 departed Denver International Airport at 6:42 in the morning on February 11th. The aircraft was a Bombardier CRJ-700, a twin-engine regional jet. The route was Denver to Billings, Montana. There were 54 passengers and 4 crew members on board. Total souls aboard 58. The estimated flight time was 58 minutes. The aircraft never reached its filed destination. Weather at Denver on the morning of departure was routine for the season. Ceiling at 1,800 feet. Visibility 3 miles. Light snow across the metro area. Standard winter departure conditions. The flight plan was filed for a direct routing to Billings at a cruising altitude of flight level 240, which is 24,000 feet above sea level. Both pilots completed their pre-departure checks without any anomaly. The weather briefing reviewed before pushback noted possible light to moderate turbulence above 20,000 feet over northern Colorado. It did not note severe turbulence. That distinction between moderate and severe is not a minor detail. It becomes relevant at 7:16 in the morning. Inside the cockpit during the first 34 minutes of flight, 3 primary display screens were functioning normally. The primary flight display, called the PFD, gave the captain real-time attitude, airspeed, altitude, and vertical speed. The navigation display showed position, heading, routing, and weather radar returns. The engine indication and crew alerting system, the ICAs, monitored engine performance, fuel state, hydraulic pressure, and dozens of other aircraft systems. These 3 screens are the foundation of modern glass cockpit operations. The crew was monitoring all of them. At 7:16 in the morning, 34 minutes after departure, the aircraft was climbing through flight level 220 over the Routt County area of northern Colorado. Outside air temperature was minus 54 degrees Celsius. The aircraft entered a turbulence cell. The turbulence event lasted 47 seconds. Peak vertical acceleration reached 1.8 g. During those 47 seconds, a cooling fan unit located in the aircraft's avionics bay experienced a bearing failure. The fan stopped spinning. This fan was responsible for maintaining the operating temperature of the avionics equipment housed in the bay beneath the cockpit floor. Without it running, heat generated by the electronics had nowhere to go. The avionics bay temperature rose 14 degrees Celsius in 90 seconds. The aircraft's thermal protection system, which is designed to shut down display units before they sustain permanent heat damage, began activating automatically. It cut power to the cockpit screens in sequence. The timeline is as follows. At 7 hours 16 minutes and 34 seconds, the aircraft entered the turbulence cell. At 7 hours 17 minutes and 21 seconds, the avionics bay cooling fan failed. At 7 hours 18 minutes and 9 seconds, the ICA's display went dark. At 7 hours 18 minutes and 44 seconds, the navigation display went dark. At 7 hours 18 minutes and 51 seconds, the primary flight display went dark. The time between the navigation display going dark and the PFD going dark was 11 seconds. Captain Hartley saw the PFD beginning to fail. In those 11 seconds, before the screen went fully dark, she called out the last confirmed readings from the display. Heading, airspeed, altitude. 3 numbers spoken aloud. First Officer Osei wrote them on the paper kneeboard he kept in his left thigh pocket. It was a personal habit he had developed as a student pilot. He had carried that kneeboard on every flight for years. No regulation required it. Last confirmed airspeed, 287 knots. Last confirmed altitude, 22,400 feet. Last confirmed heading, 352 degrees. Those 3 numbers, written on paper, became the starting point for everything that followed. What remained functional after all 3 screens went dark? The standby altimeter, showing 22,400 feet, which continued working normally throughout the entire event. A standby airspeed indicator was present, but was giving erratic and unreliable readings due to a probe heating anomaly triggered by the same thermal event that had shut down the displays. It was effectively unusable. The magnetic compass was working. The radio was working. The clock on the instrument panel was working. That was the complete inventory of available information. Outside the cockpit windows there was nothing but solid gray cloud. No horizon. No ground. No sky. Zero visual reference. The aircraft weighed approximately 70,000 pounds. It was at 22,400 feet. And its crew had no way of confirming how fast it was going. Captain Nicole Hartley was 44 years old at the time of the incident. She had 11,200 total flight hours logged across a 22-year career. She had been flying the CRJ 700 specifically for 6 years. Before her commercial aviation career, she had served 8 years as a military transport pilot with the United States Air Force. During that service, she completed a training course in partial panel flying, which is the discipline of navigating and maintaining aircraft control when most or all primary flight instruments have failed. That training is no longer part of standard commercial pilot curriculum. Hartley had not practiced those specific skills in 11 years. She used all of them in the next 22 minutes. First Officer David Osei was 31 years old with 2,400 total flight hours. He had been flying the CRJ 700 for 14 months, all of them alongside Hartley. He was methodical in his checklist execution and precise in his radio communications. The investigation specifically credits his communications management as a critical factor in the successful outcome. He was not a secondary crew member in this emergency. He was half of what kept the aircraft flying. Before beginning emergency procedures, Hartley said one sentence to Osei. "We have what we have. Let's work." The CVR records no pause after that sentence. Emergency procedures began immediately. Hartley's first priority was not navigation. It was energy management. An aircraft at 22,400 feet, without confirmed airspeed, is in a dangerous energy state. Too fast risks structural overstress and loss of control. Too slow risks an aerodynamic stall. Hartley knew the last confirmed airspeed was 287 knots. She knew the aircraft had been through turbulence that could have changed that speed significantly in either direction. She reduced power to a setting calculated from her memory of the CRJ 700's power-to-speed performance curves at this altitude and approximate weight. This was not a guess. It was a trained mental calculation applied under pressure. She held the aircraft as level as she could judge from the magnetic compass bearing and the standby altimeter's rate of change. She was flying by feel and by mathematics at the same time. The CVR records her breathing as elevated but controlled throughout. Her voice on the intercom to Osei was the same voice he had been hearing for 14 months. It did not change once. Osei set the transponder to squawk 7,700, the universal emergency code recognized by air traffic control radar systems worldwide. Denver Center responded within 40 seconds. The controller on frequency was Marcus Teller, a 12-year veteran at the facility. Teller immediately cleared all other traffic from the sector and dedicated his frequency entirely to Flight 441. Osei communicated the situation in precise, economical language. No primary displays functional. Standby altimeter working. Airspeed indicator unreliable. Requesting radar vectors and routing to a suitable airport. Denver Center could see the aircraft's transponder return on radar intermittently, but with enough consistency to provide useful heading corrections. This became the navigation architecture for the rest of the flight. ATC provided headings. Hartley flew them. Osei relayed altitude from the standby altimeter to Denver Center every 60 seconds because the transponder's automatic altitude reporting was giving inconsistent readings. While Hartley used both hands and the majority of her cognitive attention to maintain aircraft control, Osei simultaneously managed all radio communications with Denver Center, coordinated with the cabin crew, maintained the altitude relay, and cross-checked the kneeboard figures against the altimeter readings. He was executing 4 concurrent responsibilities for 22 uninterrupted minutes. The investigation found no errors in any of them. The filed destination, Billings, was 94 miles north-northwest of the aircraft's position. In normal conditions, that would have been 18 minutes of flying. Under these conditions, with no airspeed indicator, no autopilot, and the crew managing the aircraft manually in IMC, an approach into Billings carried a materially higher level of risk. The investigation later modeled both scenarios computationally. A Billings approach under these conditions had a 34% higher probability of controlled flight into terrain compared to a diversion to Sheridan County Airport in Sheridan, Wyoming. Sheridan was 41 miles closer. Its runway 01, was 8,901 feet long, providing a generous margin for a landing without confirmed airspeed data. Denver Center could provide continuous radar coverage throughout a Sheridan approach without any terrain obstruction concerns. Hartley and Osei made the decision to divert to Sheridan in 90 seconds. The CVR records no extended disagreement, no hesitation, no lengthy deliberation. Both pilots had independently assessed the same factors and reached the same conclusion. The decision was made and the diversion was initiated. Descent began at 7:31 in the morning. Hartley reduced power and adjusted pitch attitude, estimated from the compass heading and the altimeter's rate of change, to establish a target descent rate of 1,200 feet per minute. She cross-checked the combination of power setting and altimeter trend every 90 seconds, making small corrections to maintain the target rate. Without airspeed data, every adjustment was derived from the relationship between power setting, pitch attitude, and altimeter behavior. Hartley did not lose the target descent rate once during the 7 minutes it took to descend toward the approach environment. Sheridan County Airport. Runway 01. Length, 8,901 feet. The approach type was an ILS, which is an instrument landing system. An ILS provides 2 radio guidance beams, one for lateral alignment with the runway centerline, called the localizer, and one for vertical approach path, called the glide slope. Under normal operations, these beams are displayed on the navigation display as crosshair needles that the pilot tracks visually. The navigation display was dark. However, the aircraft's standby instruments panel contained a raw analog readout of localizer and glide slope needle deflection, without the graphical overlay of the navigation display. The information existed. It required someone to read it and translate it into voice callouts. Osei tuned the ILS frequency for runway 01 at Sheridan and began reading the raw needle positions aloud every 15 seconds. Left 2 dots. Glide slope 1 dot high. On centerline. Glide slope centered. Hartley flew every correction from his voice alone, without ever seeing a needle. Osei made no callout that was not verified against the standby display before he spoke it. Hartley made no control input that was not justified by a callout. The NTSB report devoted substantial analytical attention to this specific phase of the approach. Flying an ILS to decision height using only verbal needle deflection callouts from a first officer reading a standby backup display in IMC with no confirmed airspeed data in a 70,000-pound regional jet is documented in aviation training literature as a theoretical emergency technique. The investigation searched 34 years of regional aviation incident and accident records and identified 3 documented cases in which this technique had been attempted. Flight 441 is the only case in which the aircraft landed without incident. Wheels touched down on runway 01 at Sheridan County Airport at 7:41 in the morning. The landing roll was normal. The aircraft came to a full stop with 3,200 feet of runway remaining. Total elapsed time from the moment the primary flight display went dark to wheels down. 22 minutes and 14 seconds. The passengers had been told to remain seated due to turbulence. Most of them did not know anything beyond turbulence had occurred until the crew made an announcement after the aircraft stopped. The NTSB investigation produced 5 primary findings. The first finding identified the origin point of the cascade failure. The avionics cooling fan had accumulated 4,200 operating hours against a manufacturer-recommended inspection interval of 3,500 hours. The inspection was 700 hours overdue. The airline's maintenance tracking system had generated a flag for the overdue inspection. That flag had not been actioned by the maintenance department. No single individual was identified as solely responsible for this failure. The flag existed within a system that did not enforce follow-through. The system did not catch it. The second finding addressed the standby airspeed indicator. The probe heating anomaly that made it unreliable during the emergency was a known deficiency on this aircraft variant. An airworthiness directive specifically addressing it had been issued by the FAA 14 months before the incident. This aircraft had not been brought into compliance. That noncompliance is the direct reason Captain Hartley had no reliable airspeed data during the approach. Both the overdue fan inspection and the uncompleted airworthiness directive were systemic failures. Neither was the result of a single person's decision. Aviation safety literature calls this a latent condition, a failure already present in the system, producing no symptoms, causing no disruption, until the specific circumstances arrive that make it matter. The third finding addressed Hartley's partial panel training directly. The techniques she applied during the 22 minutes derived entirely from training completed during her military service. None of it is required by FAA regulations for commercial airline pilots. Following this incident, the NTSB issued a formal recommendation calling for partial panel flying techniques to be reinstated as a mandatory element of recurrent training for commercial pilots. As of the date the investigation report was published, that recommendation had not been adopted by the FAA or incorporated into commercial training standards. The fourth finding credited OSA's kneeboard notation explicitly. The 11-second window between the navigation display failure and the PFD failure gave Hartley the opportunity to call out the last confirmed parameters. OSA's habit of maintaining a written kneeboard record meant those numbers were immediately available when emergency procedures began. It is not a required procedure. It was a personal habit he had maintained since flight school. The fifth finding confirmed the diversion decision. The investigation's terrain modeling validated that Sheridan was the correct choice and that the decision was made correctly, in 90 seconds, using incomplete information and sound judgment. The report's final sentence on crew performance states, "The actions of Captain Hartley and First Officer Osei represent the upper boundary of what emergency procedure training is designed to produce." After Flight 441, the airline revised its maintenance tracking protocols to require supervisory authorization before any flagged overdue inspection could be closed without action. Fleet-wide compliance with the outstanding CRJ 700 Airworthiness Directive was audited and completed within 60 days. Both of those changes happened. The NTSB recommendation regarding mandatory partial panel recurrent training, the finding that most directly addresses why 58 people are alive, remained, at the time of the report's publication, a recommendation. A document. Unimplemented. 83% of airline pilots surveyed after this incident said they were not confident they could have completed the approach under the same conditions. That number is not an indictment of those pilots. It is a measurement of a gap between what the system requires pilots to know and what this specific situation required. Nicole Hartley closed that gap with 11 years of military training that nobody required her to remember. David Osei closed it with a paper kneeboard that nobody told him to carry. Flight 441 landed because two pilots did exactly what they had been trained to do, and because one of them had training that no longer exists in the system that trained her. The aircraft nearly did not reach that runway because a maintenance flag went unactioned for 700 hours and an airworthiness directive went uncompleted for 14 months. Both failures were invisible until they were not. Aviation safety literature has a name for that. It calls it a latent condition. What stood between those latent conditions and 58 fatalities was a standby altimeter, a paper kneeboard, and training that the industry has since stopped requiring. That is not a safety system. That is fortune wearing the face of competence. The investigation knew the difference. The recommendations reflect it. Whether the industry acts on them is a different question. And a different documentary. If you want to understand how aviation disasters are investigated and what the findings actually mean, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next analysis is already in production.